affect your results in the election, you can also let me know, and we can also have some additional comments in confidential session. Sounds good. Yes. Okay, sounds good. So item 1.2, the territorial acknowledgement. The Board of Directors acknowledges that the University of Waterloo is on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. Our organization operates on the Haldeman Tract, land promised to the Six Nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. So next item on our agenda is the student story from Anshul. For those of you who haven't seen in the chat, it appears that he has a class at this time, so he will not be here today. So that being said, I'm not sure if someone else would like to take up the mantle of student story for the next meeting, rather than delaying his again. Sure thing. So we'll put them down for the next one.
Send the student story file in the chat.
Oh, did he? Oh.
It seems like I don't have access to the file though, but that might also just be a me thing. I'm having trouble accessing files today. I'm not sure why.
I can see
also
that
can't access.
I can see he sent in his report. I don't think that's his story though. And also I don't have access. So
I have a story if we want it, but I don't mind waiting till next time.
You're okay to wait till next time. Doesn't really matter to me. We'll give you some time to think about it more. I don't know. So we'll just move on, I guess, to the next thing on the agenda, which is the agenda approval. First I'll start. Is there a second for that motion? Katie? Any comments, questions, concerns with regards to the agenda? I saw Jeff had his hand up first, so we'll go ahead with him.
Wondering if people are down to have a 5-minute discussion near the end of the agenda around possible what direction the board wants to go in with regards to VP direction. Whether, yeah, I can elaborate more at that agenda item if people are willing to make this amendment as a discussion item.
It sounds good. Are you formally putting in a motion, or are you just asking for comment?
Yes, sorry. I'll motion to amend the agenda to include a short discussion at the end of near the end of the agenda.
Okay, sounds good. Can I have a second for that? Is there any discussion on that item? Not seeing anything, we'll go right to voting then. All those in favor of adding an additional item in which we discuss sort of what the VP will look like. Matthew? Oh, I assume you're voting yes. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I think that is everyone. Just for my studiousness, is there anyone opposed? Not seeing anything. Okay. Pam, you also had your hand up.
Sorry, can I add a discussion item under, I guess, new business about board transition?
Got another formal motion?
Yes.
Good. A second for that. You can't second your own. Maybe. Okay, is there any other discussion, comments at that point, Matthew?
Yeah, I just requested access to Anshul's student story thing, and he granted it, so I'm just going to paste it in the chat. If someone in the room wants to read it, that might be best.
Sounds good. Okay. I guess we're jumping back to this quickly. So student report. Okay. Introduction, professional development courses are designed to equip students with a range of skills deemed essential for career advancement and personal growth. However, a concern has been raised by a segment of our student body regarding the relevance of these courses to their academic and professional aspirations. The report highlights the experience of students here, Roshan, who embodies the struggles and sentiment shared by many regarding the PD curriculum. Student concern. Roshan, a third-year computer science major, expressed significant frustration with mandatory PD courses integrated into their academic program. According to Roshan, the content of these courses feels disconnected from their career goals and current academic interests. They stated, I understand the importance of developing professional skills, but much of what is taught in PD feels irrelevant. I'd rather spend that time on courses directly related to my field or on programs that build my, or on projects that build my portfolio. This issue is not isolated to Roshan. Similar segments have been echoed across the student body, particularly among those in the STEM field. Students are finding it challenging to see the direct benefits of PD courses, often viewing them as a distracting from their core academic pursuits. Read the implications, but I guess we should all take a second to reflect upon that. Okay, and so I'm going to jump back then to Tam's motion. Are there any other questions, comments, concerns with the other implementation of another discussion period to talk about that item? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Okay. All those opposed? Thank you. So that will be added just under the one added by Jeff. Katie?
As for what I requested in the chat, I wanted to add the approval of CASA's letter of intent from our board. So anywhere on the agenda would be fine.
That's a formal motion.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second for that? Yes, I will second that. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns with regards to the addition of that? Not seeing any. We'll go right to voting then. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Any there? Okay. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns with regards to the agenda? Not seeing any. Questions on the floor. All those in favor of approving the agenda as now amended, raise your hand. Thank you. And all those opposed? Any? Okay. Would anyone like to declare a conflict of interest at this time? Any? Okay. Next is the consent agenda. So no discussion can be had on this. We'll go right to voting. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? Okay. Moving on to new business, item 2.1, the orientation fee budget approval. I have a seconder for that item. And we'll pass it over to Brian to give a quick rundown.
Hello, everyone. I apologize for submitting so many agenda items already for this meeting, but thank you for everybody who proposed new business, so it wasn't just me talking for the entire time. For this agenda item, we have just the orientation fee budget, just as a quick high-level overview in terms of how the orientation budget works. It's a bit of the anomaly within WUSA operations as it currently stands, because The operational year for orientation is calendar year based versus our fiscal year for WUSA is May 1st to April 30th. And so when we incur expenses in the winter term, so this winter term of 2024, they're actually related to the upcoming orientation of orientation 2024. And so we look to get budget approvals at the beginning of 2024 before, or in January, the winter term before any big purchases or business starts. But in order for us to acquire larger purchases like bulk, kid stuffing items such as drawstring bags and water bottles and start negotiating some contracts with vendors, etc. We want to make sure that this budget gets approved before any of those components get locked in. Relatively speaking, it is very comparable to years past. With a couple notable pieces, we have allocated dollars specifically for the marquee event that was brought forward at last board meeting as well. And then on top of that, you may note that honoraria for orientation O-team members. So those are the faculty or WUSA team lead representatives, student representatives in orientation has increased by $500 due to some excess funds within the budget, with additional commitment to continue reviewing what compensation looks like within the new student transition review that's happened over the course of the next year and a half or so. Other than that, I welcome any questions within this budget.
Yes, Alex.
Could you speak to what the central sponsorship is?
In terms of revenue?
Yes, the 875.
So that kind of central sponsorship, other revenues. Talking about other revenues, sorry?
Yes, under revenue, just under orientation fee, central sponsorship, 875 or 872. I'm just curious why it's not.
So if you go one more time over under scheduled revenue, I have one more sheet over, sorry. It is broken down in terms of like how we have resold some pieces in the past. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah. So where some items were resold, and then we had a Beaver Tail sponsorship when they came, they provided us with $750. Due to the very nominal cost, we aren't banking on potentially receiving those funds within 2024, but they may turn out.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alex?
One other one, the Warrior Subcommittee.
Yep.
Is that that's the one separate from the faculty, right?
Correct. That would be the central team that supports like cross-campus programming, so choose your own adventure, Warrior Welcome.
Oh, okay.
Those components, and some of the academic sessions outside of faculty meetings. Yeah. Anything that's in yellow from actuals from this past year, we're just waiting for a couple of expenses to roll in before that's fully closed off. And so that yellow is just highlighting, we're expecting to have some additional things transferred into those lines, which you can see from the variance from actual 2023 versus the budgeted. We're looking at about $130,000-ish of a difference. We don't anticipate to be over that allocated budget from last fiscal, just need to clean up some of those components there. Yeah.
Right.
What happens to the excess funds generated by orientation?
Yeah, they will hit into our retained earnings, and those will be allocated and held within the orientation account, so to speak. So if variances happen in future years or things cost more than we initially budgeted for and allowing for those variances, that could be potentially approved to dip in and fund that.
Gotcha. Is there any information on how big that fund might be at the moment?
Yeah, off the top of my head, and this is as of information that I pulled a month-ish ago, I believe we're at about $450,000 to $500,000, so it's less than 1 year's of operating budget. We did utilize that fund during the initial, I'll call first online in history, from my understanding, orientation, of where a orientation fee wasn't charged, but we dipped into that retained earnings to be able to fund some activities and infrastructure to be able to execute a online orientation.
Thanks.
Other questions? Not seeing any. So then we'll go to voting. Those in favor? Good. Okay. And looks like that's everyone, but just to be sure, all those opposed? Seeing anyone? Move on to our next item there. So discussion on event fee. Pass this back over to Brian. Second, I guess there's no actual motion. Can't be seconded, so yeah, I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, so I don't have any actual motion for this one, but it's been something that I know has been put on annual plan in terms of events strategy and WUSA event strategy, along with our 5-year long range plan around, yeah, feel free, Jeff, to jump in and ask, around enhancing kind of that student experience outside of the classroom. And so as I started to engage in some of this work, truth be told, a really large constraint that we experience within our special events side of things is around budget. We program for 3 terms out of the year, so 3 for 3. Many other schools program 2 for 3. They use their summers to recalibrate, plan, execute, etc. So we're planning for more events, and we're planning typically for more students over the years over the course of a year that we're servicing, and recognizing for events to increase in relation to also what industry costs have increased by. They've been hit extremely hard by inflation, both on service fees, on food, on beverage, and just bookings and rental spaces in general have been hit quite hard over the last 3 to 4 years. In order for us to maybe take that next step forward and be able to enhance our events, both in quality and quantity, I wanted to bring this as a discussion item for board members to chat about what a fee increase, what appetite there may be for a fee increase, what it could look like, and generally if folks are in support or not before an official motion is brought forward, because I think that is good discussion, with the understanding that any fee increase that would be brought to board, and if there's a motion to approve, that actually has to go to our general meeting, and membership is able to vote on that. So our vote here is not guaranteeing that fee increase will happen. It's that there's a motive to bring that to a general meeting. So in general, when we look at this doc, what I did just for kind of a sense of understanding was compared us to a handful of U15 schools with where data was available. If there's NA or no information, either the budget was not very clear of how many dollars they were allocating to events, or it just wasn't available at all. It made me appreciate, although we are not the best in class, but did appreciate some of our documentation and information sharing to our students. Because I saw budgets that were literally like 4 lines, 1 expense, 1 revenue, and net. And I was like, there is no information here. So I could not pull from some of those schools, but here we are. So broken down by total overall budget, cost per term per student, and then also indicated where 12 or 8-month schools existed. We're a 12-month school. with up to the lowest that I've seen is about 10,000 students here in the spring term, all the way up to about 16,000 that are still here, which is essentially the sizable array of what we're programming for in the summer. And then all the way up to 30,000 in the fall term, and in between kind of 22 to 28 in the winter term. So we have a lot of folks on this campus that are coming and going every 4 months for the most part. And so these events play a really large role in looking at kind of the dollars in what we're able to service and how far they are. That's where we're facing some constraints. And so in general, what I wanted to highlight, I guess, right now is current challenges. So we chat a little bit about CPI, and that CPI has been experienced, I think, within the event industry to a much larger degree than what average CPI and had been applicable across what our fee increases have typically gone up by. We've experienced a rising cost in our core and key capstone events that we're experiencing right now. So for example, the carnival, that has increased significantly in terms of costs that in order to execute that. And that's even offsetting the sponsorship dollars, which we've increased as well. And so in order to continue to provide more events on top of those capstone and those marquee ones that we currently are doing, there's a significant limitation on funds available to be able to execute those. Quickly noted, 3-semester school versus other schools that are 2-semester, and our school requires that year-round programming. Along with that year-round programming happens at a variety of campuses. If we look at a school like UFT, they actually have separate, SUs or groups that will find Mississauga campus or Toronto or Scarborough, etc. Versus we need to, and truthfully, we need to do a better job at providing services over to satellite campuses. And those economies of scale aren't as great as than what we experience here on main campus due to space limitations and just the overall total of students available to program for. And so that's a constraint that we definitely need to enhance on. And truth be told, I think we have gaps within what the experiences we're providing with our students through our event operations. I think we can do a better job to enhance that student experience outside of the classroom, but recognizing some of those dollar limitations, it can be challenging to do so. And so in order to kickstart discussions, as Suzanne has mentored us along the way, is you don't bring forward a problem without a solution, and maybe a couple solutions. And so want to chat a little bit about some different options and ideas that I've kind of generated and put forward here. In general, in relation to what other schools are running per student to program for 8 months of a year, the target that I've set for kind of ourselves would be about a $400,000 to $500,000 budget, with truthfully $500,000 being my professional recommendation of where we need to get to. That may not be in year one, but I think we do need to grow a budget to that scale in order to effectively program for the variety of campuses that we have, along with the amount of students and 12-month programming that we need to offer. So when we look at this, in general, the 3 options that I've mapped out on the table here is a one-time fee increase, straight up. That's on the bottom left there. That would be from where we are now, about $220,000 is what's allocated within our budget. That's there for events and volunteer appreciation and whatnot. We'd be mapping that out to about a $4.67 increase, one shot, and we're there for next fiscal. I will share some of my insights after I propose those 3 options as well. Option 2 is looking at a 2-year staggered approach around a smaller increase in year 1 of $1.67, and then a $3 increase in year 2 to reach that $500,000 mark. And then lastly is a projection of a 3-year increase of very close to equal distribution throughout the course of those 3 years, where we gradually get to that. With these 3 options, what I do want to highlight is the preference is definitely, I would not recommend option 1. Truthfully, I think we can manage, but to support doubling essentially doubling what our current budget is, will require some really core strategic planning, some operational planning, and potentially also additional staff to be able to execute that number and that large degree of additional programming. And so we might not be ready for year one to be able to absorb all of those dollars, which I can totally empathize with students across the board is if we're going to raise a fee, we better use it, we better do something with it. And I totally agree. Option 2 and option 3 are I think more favorable with no real preference in either one. Option 2, the scoping out of only having $1.67 and not an equal distribution over year 1 and year 2 would be allow us to have a little bit more of a manageable year, onboard an additional staff to be able to support that portfolio, and start prepping strategically for what year 2 will bring to implement that $500,000 mark. In my mind, I've spec'd out that about 350,000 would be my target, in and around that dollar value that we would probably need an additional staff to support programming. Otherwise, it just will get too much, and we're going to be having conversations about overtime and load time and staff getting burnt out, which we don't want to put anybody into that situation. And so year 3 is very similar, or pardon me, option 3 is very similar about kind of that staggered approach, but just a little bit more of an equal distribution across the board. And so in total, from kind of what we're looking at in terms of a proposed fee increase, it would be $4.67 from the events portion. But if we do reach above that $350,000 mark, I would say that we should be looking at additional staff in order to execute and utilize those dollars effectively, and truthfully evaluate the dollars of where they're going to make sure that they're being continuously put into good use year after year. And if we hit too high of a threshold, there just won't be enough time to engage in that evaluation, which is really critical component of what we do. And so in terms of what an approximate fee increase would be based off of what our special events team currently within roles that are currently graded and whatnot, we'd be looking at $1.08 as well from a staff perspective once we've reached that kind of $350,000 threshold. But I want to bring this forward in terms of the thought process that I've had in terms of chatting about events and fulfilling kind of that greater student experience outside the classroom, offering a greater diversity of events from passive programming and drop-in programming that can last, a day, for example, rather than having it jammed into an hour and a half or 2 hours of programming, all the way to more hands-on or more experiential programming that can be capstone events for the student experience. And so, like I said, no motions on the table, just want to bring this forward for a discussion. Want to hear kind of what people's thoughts were, if they think this is a good idea, a bad idea, indifferent, have critiques or challenges or different suggestions about how to navigate. Welcome to do that. Just trying to drive that dialogue to solve a gap that I think that we think is currently being experienced on campus, and I think many of our students have as well, that it's mapped out in our annual plan and our long-range plan. Thank you for listening for 45 minutes.
Go ahead, Alex.
Okay, I was thinking about this for a little bit. In terms of options, I do lean towards option 2 to help give that time to absorb the money and figure out staffing and stuff like this. I do think WUSA would seriously benefit from an opportunity to test the waters with what students think of an events fee increase before it goes to a vote, a referendum, just because when I think of the events that students want to see more of, the big ones that come to my mind are the therapy dogs, sex toy bingo. Like in my head, like those are like very, very big. So I'd be curious to see what students would think about getting more events in. I think that'd be really helpful to get maybe a little more student input before we bring it up. I think either way, it could be a fee that's worth bringing up in the end anyways to referendum, but I think it would really help us ground the process if we could talk to some students sooner. I'm sure other people might feel the same way.
Katie?
I'll put it in the chat again. The list of questions I put in the chat Or you'll probably have to look at them in a little bit. But I guess you could say I have, let's say 5 questions. Not that I'm opposed to increasing the fee, I'm just a little bit curious about, since this is like a discussion phase, if you've done more preliminary research at the other U15 schools and what events that they offer within their spaces and why their fees are different. The second is if we do, let's say option 2 and 3 based on your professional opinion recommendation, what measures of success will we be using to measure like how the events are going? For example, let's say we go with option 2, we increase it for year 1. What exactly are we doing in the interim to see if like that extra budget is proving to be more successful, and if we should increase it again? For instance, could we have this discussion again in the next year once we increase the fee? Similar to Alex's point for question number 3 was just student consultation. So if you had any plans for that, if you go with option 2 or 3, because I think that's where I'm leaning as well. The 4th is just, I know you mentioned a lot of programming as well. So I was just wondering if any of the programming targeted other challenges or other opportunities for students. And then the final question was just hiring and how long you would expect it to be if the fees were increased. And let's say if we had to go into other funds or budgets to pull out money if the hiring process was really fast, but we didn't have the money because we didn't have the fee ready to referendum. So that's all my questions.
How do you want me to tackle this, Chair?
If there's too many, we can like return, so like I'm sure it can be answered over email.
You can let me return to sender.
I mean,
Oh. I'm happy to tackle them, and I will be brief if.
Because I know
I don't know.
Go ahead.
it's really extensive, I guess.
For sure. Yeah, so in terms of what makes other U15 schools different from us, an example that I've been giving is University of Alberta. They are more like us than different in terms of the programs that they offer, the students that they recruit, and a bit of kind of what their campus makeup looks like, so to speak. And so in terms of programming, there's a lot of ongoing set programming. So as Alex is even talking about like sex toy bingo, there might be music bingo that's going on or trivia that's happening every week that is able to be funded on an ongoing basis, both from a host perspective and prizes to be able to engage folks from kind of that leisurely programming. From their capstone events, they run cross-campus events at the beginning of every term that are competitions between students and engagement and larger welcoming experiences around where we can be balancing smaller budgets. They're able to bring in bigger names or artists or comedians or shows. They still may have a fee associated with some of those, but they're subsidizing their programming in general. This is consistent across many of those schools that was presented, and the numbers that were presented up top are their net lines. Some of them are experiencing in between $400,000 to $800,000 in revenue on those lines as well, from different programs that they host, from bar nights or concerts, et cetera. And so that's something to take in. These are net costs. The other component is how have we examined why their fees are so different? I think we're probably lagging behind what that industry has been in the focus on events. And I had pointed to, I think, the ebb and flow that our campus experiences compared to others of having students on here for 4 months and away for 4 months. And that when you're not in that long place for an entire academic year, I think you have so many other distractions, so to speak, that within 3 weeks of the term, you're already trying to figure out a co-op. You're getting through in midterms exams, you're trying to find a new place to live where your next co-op is bringing you. And thus, may not be as much of a focus on like, hey, what can I do from a social perspective and like this. The demand's still there to go and engage in it, but I don't think that critique is necessarily funneling through because time is still being occupied in other ways. And so how we can fill that from that event side, I think is really important. And truthfully, probably to a larger degree than schools where students are able to make their community and feel at home for an 8-month period at a time and consecutively build their home and build their community and not feel like they're being uprooted every 4 months. we need to do a better job at making that less friction or less barriers for folks to be able to access, program. What measures of success? Attendance, feedback. We're building a lot of these things out right now in terms of what was missing in our events plan. So we're just about to start sending out recap surveys from basically every event that we do from attendees. Please rate it here. Did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Were there pieces that you wish could improve? Longer duration, shorter duration, and depending on the event, we're kind of making a bit of a custom questionnaire. First and foremost, though, I think it's attendance. Is if you have folks signing up, paying for a nominal fee, or showing up to a free event, it means that you're doing something that is at least interesting off the start. And then we need to make sure that we're being intentional. We set outcomes for our events. Are we achieving those outcomes? Those outcomes could literally be have fun and forget about school for an hour. But we need to ask students, did you forget about your school for an hour in order for us to measure if we were successful? So that's in the works, and we'll need to continue, whether we stay at $220,000 in a budget or we go to 500. That's kind of a non-negotiable for us, that we need to be doing that ongoing evaluation to make sure we're programming in the best way to measure our success of our office. Student consultation, open to student consultation in general. Unfortunately, I really wanted to have this conversation kind of last term to even make space for that. There just wasn't capacity in my day. So unfortunately, that didn't get brought forward, but wanted to bring that to this table. And I think part of an annual general meeting, I guess, is in turn a bit of student consultation as well, where they get to vote of whether they would like a fee or not, and have a say, while recognizing the breadth and scope of that. The board may want to do a wider consultation component than what general meeting attendance could be. Long-term impacts, if we increase the fee, the main goal that I've harped on, that I've been here since, 10 plus years I've been on this campus, is an increase of community belonging, having fun, forgetting about the grind for maybe an hour or two, and realizing, I think to some extent also engaging in a lot of experiences. I was sharing this with Jeff earlier, is like, our students are coming to campus with 95, 98, 99, 100% averages, and they've never been wrong before. They've never made mistakes. They may not have had some of those life experiences. That's totally okay. But that's also where our job is to expose them to that and develop those skill sets and allow for that learning opportunity and that growth and development. And I think hopefully, collectively we can see that from both a community lens and also just a personal experience and development lens. And honestly, Rory heard a very long rant of mine last night, but I want students to be proud as well of leaving Waterloo and not having to reminisce of a pub that was open, back in 1992, and now one night with Johnny and blah, blah, blah. Like, that should not be the core memory of your student experience. It should be a multitude of things, and we should highlight to different programs and events that happen on campus. And I think a lot of our alumni point to one experience or one involvement. And I hope that we can expand upon that. Variety of programming, absolutely. It could be on equity, deserving matters, on housing, food insecurity, mental health, co-op, career advice, professional speakers coming in, roundtable discussion, like whatever that may look like. This isn't just about fun and games, so to speak. It can be from a wide variety of even a mentorship and getting successful graduates to come in and chat. That still requires money, and it may require a monetary gift or an appreciation thing that comes in. And I think all of those pieces are on the table, and we'll continue to have them flow throughout the year. And lastly, in terms of how long do you expect the hiring to be? Truthfully, it's going to depend on what happens. We won't engage in hiring until we have a bit of a set plan. And so if we, option one is voted on, I think we're going to be in the opposite of not needing to dip into reserves, but probably scrambling to try to get somebody hired, trained, and onboarded to be able to deliver high quality events in time. I think from the latter, we can also just have an idea of, we're going to be able to have a bit of a longer time horizon to plan things accordingly of when we want that start date to be, and when we need those skills, strategy development, et cetera, to be included. So I think that of an onboarding and hiring, I don't think is going to be a large barrier to navigate.
That's good. Sam, you had your hand up?
I think Jeff had his hand up.
Sure thing. We'll go to Jeff first. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. First off, Brian, thanks for identifying this pretty huge gap between us and other schools. I at least wasn't aware of this issue, and I'm sure a lot of other people weren't as well. I think we can get students excited about leveling up campus programming with this. But to add to the others' points about student consultation, I was wondering, back last week you mentioned that there was an RSP going out this month. Is there still time for us to add in a question or a small subset of questions that are more specific with regards to something like a small fee increase for, a whole new campus programming experience?
Yeah, I believe, Melissa, I don't know if you're on the call, I believe that RSP was sent out this week. And so I believe it's out for consultation. Hello, Melissa, I'm gonna hand it over to you so I don't make it up.
Hey, no problem. Yes, the most recent RSP, the Student Pulse, did go out on Monday. So we do have another RSP coming up later in March. There is an opportunity to put something there. I don't know that it would necessarily fit what the current theme of that RSP is, but if we knew it was timely and we wanted to get something out, we could certainly consider it. So it's something to think about for sure. There are different ways we could do intercepts and things to get that. We do have a pretty long list of things that were scheduled for research consultations, RSP intercepts, and we are down one research person right now. So we're looking to do that hiring. So just something to note where this sort of might fit in. We did ask a number of questions though to students in this last RSP about events in general. What would they like to see? What would they be excited about? So we should have some good information about what that would look like should we get to the point where we can pair that with the fee piece. So yeah, that's where we're at right now.
Awesome, thank you.
For student consultation, bring it up at the director visit or at the town hall. And or you can take it to COPS and ask the other presidents to pass it to their society. And ask about it. I think a good way to get a lot of information for if we pass this before it's brought for what's it called? Annual general meeting. I think that'd be a good idea. I think this is great. I really like option 2.
Right, your hand broke.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think it's a great idea to ease people into it. And like at the very least, when we like bring it to the annual general meeting and saying like we want this small increase, see what we can do, and then bring the 3. Also, I don't think $5 is the biggest increase in the world. I think it's great. And there's again plenty of opportunity for student consultation. I've heard people. People want better. I think I brought this up during our discussion before too, but if you show them that chart at the top of it, there's what other schools are doing. Even though we are charging, you have more terms, you're still charging us overall. And I think we should show that. This is why our events. I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't have strong feelings one way or another about which consultation we utilize or not utilize. Like I think there's different avenues for each piece. So yeah, that's kind of up to the board. But I agree with you in general that I think it's challenging for students within their kind of student experience, and it can be so siloed and like feel like there's not enough going on, especially on campus. There's been so many experiences that we've had around our students are heading to Laurier for programming or heading elsewhere. And I think even when you walk around, we're lacking a little bit of that student life feeling when you walk around campus. And I think the intention is that a lot of these dollars are spent here on campus and within programming, and whether that's in Black and Gold Group or hitting up the data center and other avenues to be able to facilitate these to really make the community feel home. So appreciate your comments and yeah. I guess in general, like I'm happy for folks to be negative about it as well. If folks don't want to do a fee increase or don't see value in this or have other requirements, like happy to hear thoughts. And you will not hurt my feelings in any way, shape, or form if you think this is an awful idea.
Alex?
I will be briefly negative.
Please.
I will. I just in my hunt for student stories or just to get the pulse on campus, there are a lot of students at the same time. Like it is a real sentiment. Students do not want to spend more money. Even when you show them the numbers on the $4-ish and 67-cent increase, it does get to students when they ask themselves if they're using the services. So I think there's a lot of students who would really benefit from this, and it should be something we should continue to pursue. But that sentiment of spend less, use less, it is real. Yeah.
I think that's just the tables. Oh, it's yours? Oh.
Yeah, no, I think we felt that too from even the surveys that we've done and RSPs on food insecurity and cost of living and et cetera. Like, I don't think that it's any shock that money can be tight. Not as a counter argument by any means, but I think as a sense of optimism, so to speak, is sometimes folks don't know what they can have until they see it or experience that. And the thought of an increase initially be negative in their mind or they're not supportive. But we might see a greater participation in events and people are loving them and we're able to do more. And that is the kind of the turn, so to speak, of like, yes, this is great and now this is reducing our money. I also recognize that events are a really big part of how students view WUSA. If there's limited campus activity going on, it can also often be like, what is WUSA doing? There's a lot going on behind the scenes, but that's what they get to experience firsthand, and that's what they get to see the shows that we put on, so to speak. And I think there's a lot of value even from that. It's not a reputational play by any means, but definitely giving that experience that they can see from a tangible impact, not from an advocacy lens, or not from an elections end, or a service end that they may not utilize. They don't get to see the expanding education and diversity, equity, and inclusion potentially firsthand, and that just kind of happens over time. But they would get to experience what, even from the carnival, having 10,000 plus students out of the carnival, unique student visitors it's amazing. And I would argue that we're probably at 20,000. They just didn't check in, and having that and them seeing that firsthand. And if we do that more often, I think that's the legacy that I hope that we can make with, I think, increasing that event participation on campus, that hopefully would turn a bit of that sentiment. But it's valid and I think totally fair and representative of where some membership is at right now.
Yeah. Put your hand up first.
I was first.
Oh, yours is first. So my apologies. Go ahead.
Never recognized. I just have some more points. I put them in the chat again. I guess you could say some things that are also on my mind as we discuss this. And Brian, I promise this is the last time I will bring up some points related to
I don't believe
this.
it.
You don't believe me? Let's be all fair. I guess the first thought that I had is that I know a lot of clubs also bring up the amount of money that they receive per the number of members that they have. So I was just wondering, let's say a part of this plan, are we looking at, let's say, increasing the amount of money that clubs are provided to, let's say, expand their own activities? Number two was just sustainability in events. When we look at the options we have, and I guess like future planning, I know you really haven't had time to probably like map it out fully, but do you possibly consider sustainability as a metric of success and how we integrate that into events? Sub point, have you thought about bringing back the sustainability coordinator position for like spring discussions? Their point was, given how busy you and your team are on a day-to-day basis, what is the most reasonable option of like 2 and 3 that you think will lead to the most successful outcome? Last point that was like on my mind, which Alex already brought up, but just keep in mind how many fees as a board that we might expect to see increases on, like space fees, like events fees, tuitions going up. We've talked about multiple fees throughout our time here. WUSA fees might be going up, like a lot of stuff will be coming down the pipeline. So maybe we would be more pragmatic going with option 3 and having a lot slower increase. And finally, have we thought about, let's say, not to sound like a pessimist, but the last option of like discontinuing events is just something like that's on my mind if they're not as successful, but you've already responded to that with one of your previous points, so you don't have to respond back to that. And I understand like in terms of activity on campus, so any thoughts? Passing it back over to you.
Thank you for the mic. Double allotment amounts, that I would say that's on a strategic plan that I have not written down yet, but is in my head. 100%. Garrett loud and clear from clubs and what money they receive. That $75 amount has not gone up for a while. The intention with this is not from a club funding perspective. It's strictly kind of events that are executed. Events could be done in partnership with clubs to expand that reach and expand the support and even that full-time staff support to execute a bigger or better event and with some finances supported as well. So that's on a stable, but from specific kind of deposits and club accounts. I think that needs a much larger discovery and investigation, truthfully. Sustainability events, sustainability coordinator position or kind of the sustainability team in general. Haven't honestly had a long time or a lot of time recently to be able to assess kind of where we need to go within that. I'm a big believer in equipping our staff with those skills and abilities. And so that could look like advanced PD for our events team instead of needing an additional staff member to support just to inquire and support from the sustainability lens. And so that might be something that would lower costs in the long run as well and equip staff not just within the events teams, but it could be across the student engagement team or even the organization to have those skills and be mindful of how we can be more sustainable within our operations and support each other. Personally, I'm a big believer in that because I think that helps develop that long-term growth and we're not burdening one person with that expertise to try to spread themselves to learn, you know, the 10 different operations that WUSA offers and be able to have enough knowledge to support and engage in that because it's quite a lot. How busy I am, that's life right now. Suzanne is not on camera, but I'm assuming, or not on our screen anyways on camera, but I'm assuming she's laughing and rolling her eyes at a little bit right now where my greatest weakness is that I say yes to everything and my greatest strength is that I say yes to everything. Ultimately, I think option 2 and 3, like I highlighted, are the most reasonable. I wouldn't be in a position to say, you know, one over the other at this point. I think both are have enough space in between for us to build out some really quality strategic plans and implementation plans as well to execute the money in a responsible manner. I put multiple fee increases. I'm going to leave that one at that. I think that's kind of a board a conversation. I think the only other piece that I would add is, although fees are going up in a variety of places, I would echo my comments that I shared about with Alex is like what that you know, firsthand and tangible student experience can look like. I think this is something that students can actually experience versus you know, if a student services fee goes up or an advocacy fee or a staff fee, like those are naturally going to happen just based on inflation, cost of living, and the cost of doing business. There are longer term impacts, I think, that students end up feeling. And advocacy, you know, that's one that comes to my mind is we don't really get wins overnight or within the same year for the most part. It's a long haul that a lot of our advocacy wins both in the institution, but also, you know, municipal, federal, and provincial happen. Is that this will enhance hopefully that firsthand experience, that memorable experience for our membership. And lastly, the only thing I would point to, even though you said I don't comment on it, I still will, is we've done that, I think, even already in terms of welcome weeks. We used to run an arcade, for example. The arcade saw a couple hundred people throughout the week that dropped in. As a fall, we switched to an esports lounge and we're seeing like 1,300 people through. So we've almost 3x the amount of traffic we've had just from that event alone. And truth be told, it ended up actually costing us less dollars to implement the esports lounge than an arcade and bringing that in due to many logistical pieces. And so, yes, we cannot keep doing things for the sake of doing things. We need to be critical and get rid of our dogs, so to speak, that aren't performing. We got to get rid of those ones or reinvent them in some way, shape, or form. We can't just sit there and do the same things over and over again.
Sending the dog up to the farm, is that what you're saying, Brian?
No, I am not saying that.
Okay, Jeff, I know you had your hand up. If you have anything to add, or if some of those answers also answered your question.
To avoid repeating too much, I'll just offer 2 quick comments, I guess. I'm in favor of option 3. I guess I wouldn't want to put too much. Brian is probably the, if Brian is telling us both options are equal, it probably makes sense not to add too much stress to the department, since a lot of new things will be happening at once. Again, Brian's the expert there, but and with Katie's point as to spreading the fee increase and letting students see, I guess, the benefits of the new events in line at the same time as those fees are coming in, to sort of show students what their money is getting them. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Good. I'm not sure if you had your hand up. But...
Oh, I did. I think maybe, Katie, this can be something you bring to OCC tomorrow. About maybe getting consultation. Brian, question for you. How soon would you want like the consultation so that you can get it ready for annual general meeting? I know ASAP.
Yeah.
Like what's too close for comfort?
So I think in terms of like when we chat about process or next steps, that's why it's a discussion item. It's truthfully like that's a bit up to board of where we are and where we think we need to go. In my mind, and I shared this and I apologize for the last minute kind of, drop in availability from last week for the board members on Friday to chat about this. I will try to obviously have more availability, more notice in the future, but what I shared there and what I'll share here is truthfully, although, my role is to identify gaps and bring them forward for consideration. I would say that I rely on kind of the board and you folks as elected representatives as well to buy in and a bit of that sell and lead that project and lead this forward. And that's not to say there won't be support from myself or our marketing team or communications teams, et cetera. But I think we need to be bought in here in terms of what even those next steps look like to lead this discussion even at a general meeting as well. Otherwise, we're going to be a bit fragmented, truthfully. And so in terms of timelines, if this isn't an appetite of board to move forward as well or wanting, longer conversations and consultations, then we're probably not going to hit this general meeting, but that's also totally okay. We're just waiting and potentially prolonging when students may be able to feel that experience and that impact. And if we're looking for this one and then there's appetite to move it to this general meeting, I think then we're more selective in terms of what type of ownership consultation or member consultation could take place to be able to make sure, we have a quality presentation, so to speak, at the annual general meeting for the motion.
Yes, I will also remind people that any fee increases that we vote at the general annual meeting don't actually take effect until the spring term, or not spring term, the fall term.
Yeah.
So we would have additional 4 months still to do consultation with students to ensure that we are, keeping events in their best interest and that they are, interested in and wanting to do. Are there any other questions? Not seeing any. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm willing to motion to bring this forward for next steps. I just don't know how I should be wording it.
Is it a motion that needs to be made?
I would say if there's a motion or support, then we'd be looking at adding it to the annual general meeting would kind of be that motion specifically. If it's just kind of moving forward with an ownership consultation, at least in my opinion, I don't think the motion needs to go on the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, for shaking your head.
Yeah, you don't need it. If you're just gonna do the consultation, that's good. It's direction forward. If, so you're good.
So then I guess from the sounds of things, people are wanting to do this go forward. Is that what I'm getting?
Maybe we can try consultation this month and then bring it to next board if we think there's enough progress for AGM.
Right, Alex?
I'm just making sure we're going to consultation
Yeah.
before this hits an AGM.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I said. We do like a month of consultation. We can talk
Okay.
about that OCC and then we'll bring it back for March board meeting and see how we feel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yep.
Suddenly just thought this is happening now. Okay.
No.
I guess my only ask, at least where we are right now, in terms of like folks on the call and in the room, like thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down in terms of like general, opinions, thoughts around the increases with events and where we're at, just even assess the climate around this table. Because if we're not all on the same page either, then, we need further discussion too. Jeff just wants to go right to the AGM.
Seen a thumb, Katie. I don't know.
I put it in the video.
Oh.
Yeah, my team's reaction. That was me.
Cool. There we go.
And
Okay.
if you have a question.
Yeah, Matthew, is that a question or is that
No, just like a final comment. Also, just one of the concerns I'm hearing from students a lot is the fee increases, and especially with the student services fees going up quite a bit in fall. Just something to keep in mind. So if we are choosing one of those options, I'm also leaning towards option 3.
sounds good?
But yeah, to be discussed at a later date.
Sounds good. Moving on to our next item 2.3, capital improvement approval. Also, Brian.
I won't be long this time. At least I'm going to try not to be. I'm so sorry for everybody's probably sick of hearing from me. Corey, Matthew, if there's a change in what was submitted in terms of the motion, do I do that now or after? What's best practice here?
Do it now. I'd say because no one's made it, a motion or seconded it.
Okay. So just an update in terms of this motion. So initially, when it was submitted, we had a little bit of incorrect information coming over from consultants and what work was quoted in the initial quote. Along with, I was in a very good spot to build out, to actually like have a final plan supported about what infrastructure, or pardon me, merchandise or improvements could be within the space. I did not get to a spot of where I could finalize that for this meeting, and so I'm not pushing through, something that isn't finalized. So I am would be wanting to kind of revise what this motion is to board approves allocating $40,000 plus HST to complete physical infrastructure improvements to the thrift store from the SLC capital improvement and deferred maintenance fund. Sorry for the mouthful. And so this is a fund specifically that is related to the Student Life Center, separate from the capital fund. We have 2 kind of capital funds that are available.
I just sent a text in the chat for anyone looking for it. Good.
Awesome.
Is it a presentation or is it just a slide that says?
No. Yeah, I have a couple slides.
Yes.
This is the final product.
Yeah.
So in terms of kind of sharing where we currently are at, and what our current state is, want to highlight a couple of things of where we are.
It's loading.
And so an important note here is that when the thrift store was initially created and opened, we took a space that was a hair salon from many, many years ago and was really unoccupied for probably 5-6 years. And that space had not been renovated, probably, my guess is probably since the late 2000s. And so there's tiles missing in the floor, there's broken ceiling tiles, there's electrical wires sticking out. And we wanted to get the service up and running as kind of, let's see what it does. Let's see if there's an appetite by students from it. And so there was very low investment going into that. For example, our change room is comprised of shower curtains and just some, aluminum tubing. not the greatest for folks to try things on, and not maybe the most secure and visually appealing to enhance that space. And so from an infrastructure perspective, we have some safety concerns that are happening with different levels and raised floor in certain spots, and some trip hazards to, although not live wires, still electrical wires sticking out of walls, junction boxes not being mounted, some holes in drywall, etc. And so we're really not in a great operational state, so to speak, both whether that is for the purpose of using it for the thrift store, or just as a generally occupiable space within the building. It is not up to an acceptable standard, so to speak. And so wanting to bring this motion forward with looking at how we can improve that core infrastructure, not necessarily to add bright lights and crazy fixtures or millwork within the thrift store, but really get it up so that when folks walk in, they don't view what was the end of a business that closed, that hadn't been updated since probably 2007, 2008. They view a more modern and truly safe experience of when they're walking in, to both have faith in the thrift store, but also I think to have faith in the building and to engage in some really quality building infrastructure. And so I just, in the slide here, I just shared a couple kind of pieces. It doesn't capture it fully, but some of the highlights around like, that's an outlet just literally hanging off the wall. And that one works. It is protected and nobody's gonna get electrocuted by it, but not in a great spot. As we can see from that photo in the bottom middle, there's flooring completely missing, glue exposed, different levels. We have that junction box sitting kind of in the middle of the wall, completely, exposed as well. We have that kind of 2x4 framing on the right-hand side that I don't know what it's framing, truthfully, but it's framing. And so, when I walk into the space, I have a difficult time, having a positive customer experience, and I can only imagine that our membership feels the same way. And so this SLC Capital Fund was also created to manage through these core building improvements that aren't really related to the service offering that's in there or the operation, but really getting it back to an acceptable standard in some of those pieces that deferred maintenance has caused, and this is the end result of years and years of deferred maintenance experience on campus. And this is not the only spot on campus that I would assume looks like this. There are many others that we can highlight, but this is one I think we can address. And so within kind of the next slide here, within infrastructure improvements, the focus of where this $40,000 would be aiming to is really fix it up, truthfully. We'd be looking at updating some electrical that is required within the panel and rewiring many of the electrical wires because they are outdated. Bring in some modern lighting and light fixtures just to brighten up that space and making it feel welcoming. Eliminate trip, slips, and fall hazards within this space, and having a floor would be nice. And then looking at some of that kind of drywall patching and some paint work as well. Within the actual thrift store itself, we've seen moderate traffic, about 1,200 guests kind of over the course of a calendar year. Recognizing we've had some operational gaps within that period of time as well, where we had some closures based off of difficulty to recruit staff members to be able to operate the store, to some of our own staffing challenges to be able to support the opening and operational requirements that are involved there. And so that 1,200 isn't really reflective of an entire operational year, but truthfully with improved infrastructure and improved appearance and aesthetics and that experience, hopefully, I mean, retail 101 is you build a clean and somewhat modern store that looks good and is well lit, people will come. And so this isn't even about the fixtures or the millwork within the space. It's just about that core to allow our membership to have faith in what we're offering and what we're creating within that space as well. In terms of financials, just want to do a quick overview here. So we did receive this quotation, and please note my Bitcoin logo as our first number. We won't be paying in Bitcoin, but I thought it was fun. A quotation that we received from Plant Operations in early January of 2023 was for around 25,000 plus HST. This was focused primarily on electrical and patching the floor, but not really addressing with leveling issues and making it seamless. And so in my opinion, once we learned this and got more information, there isn't sense to put Band-Aids on Band-Aids. We're not actually addressing the problem. We're just kind of hoping we're going to stop the bleeding at some point if it ever happens. And so after looking at, we need to add some paint, probably some vinyl or laminate flooring within the space to spruce that up and patch some drywall as well. That's the type of work that we're going, which is why the dollar amount proposed isn't that 25,000 plus HST. It's looking at that core investment just to make that space look acceptable, so to speak. Within the SLC and deferred maintenance fund, there's currently a balance of $630,000. And so this would be taken out of that fund and would bring our total dollar amount to, oh, no, I pointed you for the slide. I was going to get you to do mental math. 590,000. And so there is ample funds available. There is funds available to be able to fund this project and leave us in a good spot. So as we're looking to the future, I alluded to this at the very beginning, but there potentially will be further conversations about what kind of fixed assets we could add within that space. So that could be fixtures, enhanced millwork, of maybe changing the design of the layout. But I truly think more work needs to be done in that before I bring a proposal to fund that from the capital fund to a different fund. And so I'm just kind of foreshadowing of what that can look like, from more modern and streamlined millwork within the space to creating fitting rooms that are not made of shower curtains and aluminum, patched together, and looking at even the customer flow and traffic and layout and what fixtures we need to do to provide that. And even if the current space is the right space. I emphasize that as the current space, if it's the right space, because even though there will be dollars going in to improve the space, whether it is the thrift store or something else in the future, we need to update. And we need to get that into an acceptable standard. That second piece, what I want to get in and have conversations about is, does the current location make sense from a traffic perspective? Is there other opportunities to expand on within the operations or tie other things together? I don't have that answer and I don't have that research here for you today, but I do think forecasting of when that may happen, that might be over the next 12 months. But we got to provide service today within the space, and we do have folks visiting, and so I think that that's really important, but did want to maybe provide some foreshadowing of potentially what to expect. So in terms of where we are, have that formal motion on the table of really that $40,000 coming from the SLC Capital Improvement and Deferred Maintenance Fund, specifically related to those core infrastructure improvements to make the space an acceptable standard, not to add any bells and whistles on top within the thrift store itself. So wanted to bring that as forward for folks, just so we are aware. We were going to have to, figure out a way to make it an acceptable standard anyways for this term. From an operational perspective, the thrift store is currently closed with communication that we are renovating, at least to some degree. Whether that was Brian coming in with his tool belt and, covering up exposed wires and outlets and being handyman Brian. It was needed to do anyways, along with just where we were at an operational front as well. So currently that space is closed, and it is a really great term to be able to execute this with, and then hopefully hitting the thrift store, or pardon me, the spring term with it open. There's really no motion on the table yet either.
Okay. Katie has her first question in the chat.
It's already been answered. So I said, thank you, Brian.
Oh, there you go.
That's good.
You want to go ahead, Alex, and then we'll have Jeff go after.
Super brief, super fast. Yeah, the 2x4 frame, really.
It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, you might have to keep that in. That's but in all seriousness, regarding the SLC Capital, that fund for fixing, does that fund apply to spaces that are currently in WUSA use or anything? Like, for example, if SLC 10s needed a remodel, would that No, that would be university.
That would be like whoever that tenant is, in that case, it's the university would be responsible for their like physical infrastructure improvements, equipment upgrades, millwork, et cetera. This is really coming from like the core of the building,
Okay.
and getting it to an operational state.
Okay. And then the last thing was, this 40,000 is just the safety, the bare bones minimum to get the space up and running. You mentioned maybe it's not the right space for the thrift store, and I'll just leave that. I'll leave that as a,
You may.
I will leave that. But this is just the minimum.
Yeah, and truthfully, like, that's not me trying to be, sneaky or say like, oh, I'm gonna drop another motion, in a month from now. I don't think that work is gonna be able to be engaged in within the next kind of 6 months timeframe. And so for us to create like a true quality assessment of what that future holds, it may not be that space, and recognizing there are limitations within that SLC hallway of traffic and visual, appearance for students to be able to come and just even leisurely shop around. You can't see it when you're in the SLC. You got to go. It's a destination. So recognizing if we want it to be that, browse and shop, probably currently is not in the best spot, but that was the spot that we had available when we needed to implement it at that time. And so that's what we're kind of continuing to run with until we're able to do more planning.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jeff.
If anyone else has questions, feel free to jump in. But otherwise, I'll motion to I'll motion as recommended, as Matthew has outlined in the chat.
Okay, can I have a seconder for that? Alex? Any last questions, comments? Maybe last question for me. Does this include the space that's next to it in the photo? And they're going to continue to be able to operate normally?
Like the photo studio, to my knowledge.
Okay. Go ahead with the motion then. All those in favor, please raise your hand. See everyone. Thank you. Safe. All those opposed. Your hand is still up. I'm not sure if.
I raised my hand for in favor, but I think it's not working.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah,
Sounds good.
Favor.
I will. Okay. So next item on the agenda as amended is Jeff's item. So I'll pass it over to you, Jeff.
Oh, okay. For some quick context, I guess there was a brief discussion at governance committee about what to about filling the VP role, which some of us may be aware that there's no candidate for, and a similar situation to what we had 2 years ago, where no VP was also elected. A good suggestion was brought up that the next board should decide what they want to do with this role, but I guess I had a few concerns with that and wanted to hear other people's thoughts. Where, if we're waiting to April for the new board to figure out what they want to do with that, we miss those like 2 months of transition time, and whoever the new VP ends up becoming sort of has to scramble to catch up with everyone else. Also, I think even if we do want to do that, it probably makes sense for us to outline a set of, if not guidelines, then like historical context to aid in their decision. I personally feel like we should probably be aiding. It's our responsibility to make sure the next board is fully prepared. And yeah, wondering if anyone has any thoughts as to if we want to task the governance committee with bringing forwards either guidelines or some kind of historical context document for either this current board to decide on how to deal with the vacant VP position, or if we really want to, the next one.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Alex.
Hello, Jeff. I think this would be a very good use of the governance committee's collective minds. I think this would be a good thing to figure out as a committee and then bring back to the board. No bias or anything. I am also on the governance committee, but I do think it is
Governance.
somewhat.
80?
I
Are you
guess
sticking around?
that's not the point. I just have a couple of thoughts because the voting period hasn't started yet, so we don't even know who will come into office. I think we would set a new precedent of providing recommendations to the next board when in previous years people have either been appointed, there's been a by-election, or I had a chat with Suzanne about it briefly. And Suzanne, feel free to chime in if I'm forgetting anything. But as far as I know, we can't necessarily appoint anyone and we can't necessarily pick any VP for the next board.
No.
So I would be curious as to what type of guidelines or recommendations you would put forward, or at least the governance committee, for everyone who's on governance now, that would, I guess, say, what influence do you think those recommendations would have once the new board members come? Because they won't even have their transition until May. I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just curious. And that's my question.
Maybe I'm going to pass over to Matthew unless Sandra has something to add first.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to go the order because you've got Shevin's in front.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Hi, sorry, I was just heating up my dinner, but okay, it's just a quick question. I'm wondering how it was handled 2 years ago, as I was not on board or in Waterloo. How did you guys handle with like the VP vacancy, and did it work? And also, yeah, that's my first question. Like, how has it been done before? And if it was successful, is it something that we could possibly follow through?
My understanding of it, correct me if I'm wrong, was that nobody ran for president, but somebody did run for vice president. The vice president became the president, and then the previous boards, the year before that year, hired someone to be the vice president for the year. But that also meant that they weren't a voting member of the board of directors. Is that correct? Or?
I'd have to double check. I don't think it was the previous board.
Okay, that might be
the new board. I was on the board then. But yes, broadly speaking, a VP was hired to fill out and cover off that role. And then that's an option that would certainly be available to the next board. The board isn't bound by any sort of necessary precedent. I think the board is free to pursue whatever opportunity or option it thinks is best. I've sort of been preparing something for the new board to take a look at that maps out a couple of the options that I see before them, at the very least all of the options I see before them, to sort of help support them in that. That's something we've been working on just internally to governance, recognizing that that's going to be something that's going to be important. And that's what happened in the past, but it's not necessarily the path they have to take this time. It's yeah.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. My comments are going to be a little bit about a nuance around being a not-for-profit corporation and the fact that you have an election that re-elects everyone going in. It is a good practice, and this idea of how to fill a vacancy is perfect for the governance committee to come up with some options. When we had the conversation, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't a lot of documentation of what had been done in the past. So part of what governance committee wanted to do is to make sure that you've got some options set. And again, it's Matthew, the work that you were putting together is all part of that. So it is good from a continuity standpoint to have the board right now, because it is a matter for the board to look at what are some of the options, have them ready for the board that comes into being after the election. So they're not starting from scratch. Absolutely not. Should this board be appointing into that vacancy. That is a decision for the next board, but it's well within your obligations, and I would say responsibility, to come up with to provide that documentation and suggestions, because you're the ones with the wisdom right now and have gone through all of this and can carry it forward. And hopefully, I know many of you are running again, so hopefully you will be able to carry that knowledge forward into the next board.
Sounds good. Pass it over to you, Jeff.
Sorry, bad timing on that. I guess first a response to one of Katie's questions regarding transition not happening until May. I think the policy manual outlines, and especially what we saw last year, training sessions start much earlier than that, ideally as soon as we can after elections end. So I had a question for Sandra regarding that. I guess, is the board not appointing someone a legal requirement, or is that just good governance practice? But before you answer, I guess my suggestion would be, if we do figure out a set of materials to assist the next board in their decision, perhaps if we can informally with the board identify a direction they would like to go in, we can at least prepare a potential VP candidate or all potential VP candidates with the training that they would need to get started on day one. Because what I just don't want to happen is for the new board to come in, not knowing what's going on, and then for them to have to select and then fully onboard a new VP, losing that 2-month lead time, and probably even that, if we continue doing those off-campus training retreats, they wouldn't be part of that, I guess.
Potentially. So I think a couple comments around your question, Jeff. I know that you were contemplating the election. The election is over before the end of February, so you know who the new people are going to be, and you were looking at having some onboarding sessions for them in March, so they could be up to speed. They're not an official board at that point, but you can have the conversations. And it would be absolutely, from a governance best practice standpoint, as you're talking about with the new board onboarding, then what are the issues before the board? One of the issues is filling the vacancy. So to your point of having that informal conversation, you would be able to have that so that they can be ready. And if you've got see where they're leaning with it, some work staff can do to help get ready for what the next part is. You won't lose 2 months. You probably will lose a month. And that, quite frankly, is life. And you can bring the person up to speed. You're going to have to bring them up to speed. So what kind of resources do you need to have available to get them up to speed as quickly as possible, knowing that you have to go through whatever process to fill the position?
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's what I would sort of lean towards, is setting out for the governance committee to put together some resources for the board, and then for this board to informally see where the next board is leaning to best facilitate training of and onboarding of any potential VP candidates. Does everyone else around the table generally agree with this approach? Or are there any other thoughts, comments, concerns?
Would be nice to know for the next candidate, right?
Unless if they would even want to do it.
But they're gonna have to get there. So
Wait,
sorry.
this is a separate conversation.
Well, I think it's important that they know. So as part of our different, provincial and federal advocacy bodies, there are different roles that you can take or you can run for. One of the roles being, president, vice president. Katie is the current vice president.
There is a change that's happening with the bylaws, though. So they won't officially be president anymore. It's a little bit complicated. Let's say in the current structure.
But essentially, there are roles within WUSA that they could run for, and I guess the concern that I would have is just like, if they're getting it in May, they have to declare in May if they're interested in that position. So it might be a concern that, like, if they're going through transition in such a short period of time, plus they're also having to consider these other options available to them, it might be a condensed timeline.
I guess, to add on to that, during Steph's term as president, Steph took on WUSA, which was a part of the VP's portfolio. So it's not impossible for the president to take on the VP's portfolio, but it would be very hard.
Yeah, I would probably not recommend going forward that they do that as much, just to have better as of a mass. I think it's probably better for the organization, but that's just sort of my thoughts as the current president. Go ahead, Sandra.
My suggestion would be, so you don't go down rabbit holes right at the moment, identify that as an issue that needs to be addressed and considered by governance when they're bringing back recommendations. And so what I think I heard it being is the transition for roles outside of the organization, outside of WUSA, that the vice president may have to fill. How do you make sure they're up to speed, and let the governance committee come up with some ideas? And I'm sure there are other things both you and Katie will identify that are issues that need to be addressed.
Good, okay. We set to governance committee as long as you're okay with that. Mr. Chair Jeff. Okay, so we'll move on to our next item. Cam, this is your item.
Right. I'm going to send the board policy manual in chat, page 25, so it's easy to access. It's February, and I don't think we've really talked board transition at all, even though 2.1 already calls for it during the opening, between the opening of nominations and the commencement of the election campaign period. So I wanted to get the discussion started on this first. It's a question for Pat Matthew. Probably has any work been done yet for transition, and a more general question to board of, as we transition out or stay, depending on who stays, like what do we want the next board to see, or like what were problems we saw when we transitioned as a board that we want to fix or change up for the next board?
I have a long list.
I have been working on that a little bit in the background in terms of preparing going forward for training. More directly in terms of, stuff should have been offered by now. That's a component of the policy manual that we are not in compliance with, obviously. And that's for reason of Cassie. This big thing, Mike's and Elena are both out. And so it's just me working part-time now in governance in a department that had, 2.5 full-time staff last term. Certainly a lot of things on my radar have been slipping. In terms of what I have been planning has been reviewing the transition process we had last year, and then taking a look at, and this is something I was planning to circulate with the board in some form or another, of feedback on what that looked like, and what potential changes would be there to better prepare people for this year. More of what, less of what was missing, and other pieces like that have been on the go. And I've also had a couple of conversations with Sandra at a very high level about preparing for the transition. So there are things in the works, nothing concrete as of this moment.
Suzanne?
Thanks. I just also wanted to note that we have started internally having some conversations about reviewing what last year's schedule looked like, reviewing some of the feedback that you folks gave us after the initial transition. And our intention was to come back and actually ask more now that you've been in the roles for an extended period of time, looking back, and maybe having a look at the schedule of training that we provided last year and talk to us about what gaps are, what are the things that maybe we should include and help support getting those sessions ready for board as well, just so that there is some thought behind the scenes. We were actually in the next week or so going to get our project team together to start the process again. So
Sounds good.
I'm going to bring back my second question to the board of, is there anything that we want to see for the transition or to empower the next board? Like, I brought this up during governance committee. I'm going to give an example. When we were making the annual plan at the beginning of the governing year, at least I didn't personally feel that I was prepared enough for it. It was very early on, and I still learning how WUSA operates and how my role works. So I thought one change that could be made in the transition is that the current board could maybe try and draft up something of this would be a great annual plan, and then the next board would be able to come in and finish off that work. That's more for governance committee maybe, but just as an example of like, how do we better prepare the next board to be able to do their jobs?
Alex?
Jumping on that, I think like a really like concrete thing that the next board could benefit from is like, yeah, you said it, more more like tools to be able to do their job at the board. For me, that would have lied in more Robert rules education. I definitely know them now, but you know, I think at the start, more Robert's rules would be good. I think when it comes, I think those are the tools that maybe we should focus on providing the next board to draft their own annual plan. I think if we, hey, here's what it might look good, we're just drafting 2 annual plans, one for, I don't know if that's what
No,
we're gonna do.
The idea was that just like, here's what this annual plan looks like.
Yeah.
Based on what we did so far, here's what we think will be good to continue. But like, obviously, the new board will come in with their own priorities and stances that they may want to tweak it with. Like, just give them like a stepping stone, for example.
I see.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh.
Matthew's next.
Oh, I don't know whether Matthew's going to say the same thing as I was, but I know that as we sort of work through this new governance structure and process, it's sort of, I think last year in the annual planning, it was a little bit of a challenge for us as a group, both from senior leadership team and board, for us to collectively work together on that plan. And as I believe I'm correct in this, Matthew, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the annual plan comes from the executive director and the organization, and we work then together to approve and I guess I'll say finalize it. So hoping that we can have that process work a little bit better with all of us together during the transition phase, and having those conversations and driving the conversation from the organization and then what folks who are on the board as well would like to see. So hopefully a collaboration would be great.
I was going to say a fair bit of what Suzanne just said, yeah. And what I'll expand on just a little bit is something I've spoken to a couple of you about, is that I've had that in mind. And so Suzanne and the rest of the senior leadership team around the senior leadership team is supposed to take a better role in helping prepare that annual plan and bring an early draft to board, reflecting, you know, what's currently happening in the organization, what our data and research shows, what are the priorities of the directors coming in, and sort of table that draft and work off that. And that wasn't something that happened so much in the last year's process. So that's something that I know we all have in mind as a part of that transition training and work leading up to the start of the government year, and then also, you know, that big meeting at that start, and then actually starting when they start as board. So the intention is for that process to look a little different and have a fair bit of more thought put into the start and effort and time put into it ahead of that. So it's not as much of a right plan.
Amanda, I think you had your hand up.
Oh, yeah, this was already kind of mentioned. I was just gonna mention that in terms of like preparing for the annual plan, I think what would really help is to have like a WUSA for dummies type of like information session, so that you could intimately know, okay, this is what WUSA does, this is how I can affect WUSA, and then I can do this through the annual plan, rather than just annual plan.
Sandra.
From just a consideration for you, from a governance perspective and the board perspective, there's a slight nuance between the annual operating plan, which both Suzanne and Matthew were talking about, because that's what the organization is going to do. On top of that is the board work plan. And what the board work plan needs to entitle is, what are the committees doing? What is the board focusing on, so that you're keeping the administrative operations pieces with the operations team. However, as a board, you've got some accountabilities of things to come forward. So when are you going to see the finance reports? When are you going to see those kind of things? Not so much the details of what operations are doing. So there's a bit of a nuance in two plans that you're going to come up with. One is your operating plan, and then the board work plan on top of that, which really drives how you're governing the organization. And this is the next learning I would suggest in implementing your new model. This past year, you guys have done a fantastic job figuring out how the new model works. And now there's some of the more refining pieces that you're working on, and the board work plan is one of those.
Sounds good. Back to the governance committee, it sounds like. Okay. Okay, gonna move on to Katie's motion now.
I put it in the WUSA board official chat, the one with two of everyone's emails. But essentially, the motion I would like to put forward is we resolve that WUSA 23-24 Board of Directors approves the CASA letter of intent to join the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, or otherwise known as CASA. I hope most of you have read through it. I know we've had several discussions on federal advocacy. Following my recommendation that I provided earlier on in my tenure, and then our conversations from last month, I believe in January, I would like to push forward so that way, let's say when we do find a VP in that role, they are also a part of a well-known and supportive organization such as CASA, and that will help them at least with that federal advocacy push that we are hoping to see, I think, more long-term. That's about it.
That's good. I will second that. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, not seeing any then. We will go ahead and ask the question. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. That's there. Okay, just to be safe, all those opposed? I don't know, I think Ahmed's hand is still doing the buggy thing, so I assume.
I'm in favor. In favor.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. And so that, I believe, brings us to the end of open session regular items. Now it's just open session reports. Are there any questions, comments, concerns with regards to, we'll start with my report, I guess. This is not open session. Not seeing any. We'll leave that to comment. Okay. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Are there any questions for Katie with regards to her report?
My report is in our board chat because I submitted it late. Oops.
Just okay, not seeing any questions. Are there any questions for Suzanne with her updates? Or any of the other SLT staff joining us today? Okay, not seeing any. Are there any questions with regards to the director report? Go ahead, Jeff. We can't hear you, Jeff.
Shoot. Actually, out of safety, I'll ask in confidential session because I don't actually recall which session this item was under. So just to be safe.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, nope, that's all for our open session. Yes, I will move that we enter confidential. Can I have a second for that? Katie? We are now in confidential session.
Hi, Catherine.